Ladies and gentlemen, do I have a treat for you today? As you guys know on the channel, we dive into the story of Call of Duty, and as it turns out, there's a lot more story hidden in the multiplayer than you previously may have thought. And if you don't know what I mean by that, with Modern Warfare 3, they added 25 new operators, and I believe 21 of which have full-on backstories to do with them. Now, I make videos on characters' backstories all the time. So far, we've talked about Makarov, we have talked about Soap, but in this one, we are going to go through all 25 of those new characters and look at their backstories. Now, these bios are long, so what I have done is taken the most important parts and summarized them so that you guys can get the information as quick as possible. The other thing that you may not know about this is a lot of the characters within multiplayer actually have ties into the single player story, some of which were a part of the Urzikstan Liberation Force. Some of them died. Some of them worked for Imran Zakhaev. A lot of these stories tie directly into the overall story, and you probably, if you haven't read them, didn't even know about almost all of these. And some of the stories are really cool. Some of them are also pretty boring, but some of them are really, really cool, and you'll see that as we go through it. There's going to be timestamps for all of the individual characters down in the description, as well as, of course, on YouTube. But we're going to be looking at every single operator's backstory. So in other words, this one's going to be a long one. But before we do, let me first tell you about today's video sponsor. This video is sponsored by Outplayed. This is for you content creators or just some people who want some awesome clips of the games that you play. This is a completely free app, which if you click the link down below, you can go and check it out. But essentially what this does is automatically clip the best moments from your favorite games that you play, Call of Duty included. Whether those are headshots or just intense moments, you can go in the app, edit your videos in there, and immediately post them to whatever your favorite social media app is. YouTube, Twitter, Discord, pretty much anything you want. So if you want some amazing clips, click the link down in the description. It's free to download, check them out, and thank you Outplayed for sponsoring the video. So there are going to be a couple of characters that we don't cover in here, for example, Ghost and Price, because their stories are much deeper and require their own videos. Also, some operators like Blueprint simply do not have bios whatsoever. But the first one that we are going to look at goes by the name of Byline. Now, Byline, aka Isa Juarez, is a ranger instructor and squad leader native to Maywood, California. She started her military career in journalism, hence the name Byline. She started off writing for her school paper, after which she ended up joining the ROTC to do military journalism. After this news broke about the first woman to make it through ranger training, she wrote a story on it and wanted to accomplish the same thing. She did it on her second time through training. After this, she helped others complete the same task before deploying in infantry in Southeast Asia as well as the Middle East. The next operator we have is a very interesting one with direct ties to the zombie and Warzone storylines. As far as this character, we have Scorch, aka Zirian Sareti Hadid. He is from Urzikstan, and believe it or not, he used to work for Viktor Zakhaev, but not in the way that you might think. You see, he grew up in Urzikstan during Barkov's occupation of the area. One day, his parents got up and decided to go to scavenge for food. However, they were never to return, and Scorch would never find out what actually happened to him. Because of this, he grew up extremely poor in the darker places of Urzikstan. He grew up and eventually became a soldier for the Urzikstan Liberation Force, and was one of their absolute top soldiers. At this time, he was then approached by none other than Viktor Zakhaev, and Viktor promised him riches beyond his wildest belief, and growing up poor, he's always wanted this, so he took the offer, and what he did is join Viktor Zakhaev in that very first mission that we saw, that very first cutscene into the exclusion zone, where he went in, and all of a sudden, he begins to see the horrors that Viktor Zakhaev brings to the world. In other words, the zombies. At that point, he swore to never do this again and to do everything he can to get back at Viktor Zakhaev, joining Operation Deadbolt and becoming one of the good guys. Ripper, aka Ateo Davies, might be saying her name wrong, is from London in the UK. Growing up, people started to notice her as a solitary figure, someone who would keep to themselves, but often be in fistfights. However, she was never starting them, she was just ending them. With this skill set, eventually she wanted to join the police force, however, found all of the paperwork and bureaucracy very, very boring. So from here, she ends up joining the army. At which time she ends up joining a special mission working with the SAS alongside the ULF, or the Urzikstan Liberation Forces. And from everything that I could find, it appears to be the final mission of Modern Warfare 2019 where they storm Barkov's compound. After this, she was then invited to join Operation Deadbolt as a secret weapon and was offered this by some of her colleagues that she worked on that Barkov's mission. In other words, I believe Kate Laswell offered her this job. Now, this next one is crazy. This next character goes by the name of Pathfinder, and she is from Urzikstan, but has more ties to the Modern Warfare story than probably any other character that we're going to look at here, because this character's real name is Samara Jalal. Now, you may recognize this, but as far as her story goes, she grew up in Urzikstan during the days of Roman Barkov's reign. While Barkov was attacking Urzikstan, she fought against them and eventually became a captive, but a captive in the same prison that Farah Karim was held in, and was a member of her forces that led the escape on that compound, eventually returning to Urzikstan to fight against Barkov's forces and help her children become safe and sound in the place that she called home. But it didn't end there, because on one fateful day on Flight 761, she was sitting on a plane headed for Russia that just so happened to be occupied by Kony ultranationalists. At this time, the person sitting beside her recognizes her as the Urzikstan Liberation Freedom Fighter, and at this time ends up capturing her, strapping a bomb to her, and blowing up the plane. That is right, this is the same Samara Jalal that was in the Modern Warfare 3 campaign. This even more solidifies the fact that the Modern Warfare 3 multiplayer actually takes place before the events of the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, because as we know, Samara, well, she didn't make it off of that plane. Up next, we have Riptide, or Thibault Lefebvre. I'm definitely saying that name wrong, but he was born on the French coast, and everyone who grew up around him grew up surfing. However, he had a problem. He wasn't the greatest in the water. In fact, he could barely stay afloat on a surfboard, but he dedicated himself to the craft and eventually learned to surf extremely well. Now, eventually, there was a big world event where hostages were taken, and these French Navy commandos went in, swam in, and rescued the hostages. After hearing this, he wanted to do the same, eventually joining the French Navy, and with the same dedication he took to surfing, he took to becoming a Navy commando for the French. He now works in counterterrorism, and specifically works hard on underwater or water missions, rescuing hostages, and doing what he wanted his entire life. Barbecue, aka David Fisher. As far as he goes, he has one of the most straightforward stories out of any of the characters. Essentially, he grew up in Texas, and his entire family was military. He grew up listening to stories from his uncles and grandparents about their deployments and military actions, grew up shooting on the giant farm in Texas, but before dinner, he would make his way to the kitchen and work with his mother and grandma, learning all of their family recipes. Now, eventually, he ends up joining the Marines and was a dedicated officer, rose through the ranks, but on his spare time would go into the kitchen and help the field chefs make their meals. He would focus on home-cooked meals, and people ended up loving him for it. He was great for stories, talking, and helped new Marines grasp the ropes and work their ways through the ranks as well. Like I said, very straightforward story. Up next, we have Jabber, aka Mike Wan. Now, he was born in Rhode Island in the United States to Chinese immigrants. Now, his father was a civil engineer, and because of this, by the time he reached middle school, he lived in 6 different countries over 8 years, every single time learning a new language, learning their culture. But by the time he reached high school, his family decided to move home to Rhode Island. He was incredibly bored with this, so by the time he graduated high school, to his parents' horror, he ended up joining the military. He did this as a way to go and explore the world, and he did. They sent him all over the world. He learned many different languages, and in each of those locations, he used his ability to speak these languages and ability to talk to work his way out of most situations. Now, one cool thing about him is he is actually a member of Delta Force, and because of this, gets sent around the world on many different missions, specifically working on counterterrorism and hostage situations. Jet, aka Abe Katie, I'm not sure if I'm saying that last name correct, grew up in Okinawa, Japan with her grandparents. As a kid, most of her friends were out playing sports, but she was obsessed with planes, seeing them fly in the sky, cut through the clouds. That is all she could focus on. Now, growing up being a complete thrill seeker, she ended up stealing her grandparents' cars, boats, motorcycles, and literally driving them all over the place. And as soon as she became of age, she got her pilot's license. Now, she almost lost it a couple of times doing some crazy maneuvers, but eventually, as she got older, her grandparents ended up getting in a bad car accident and were unable to provide for the family. So she stepped up and essentially joined the Japanese Air Force, where she would become a transport helicopter driver. However, she was quickly recognized and was the first female to actually be asked to be a fighter pilot. By the way, this is actually a real story based off of the real life person by the name of Misa Matsushima, who was actually the first female fighter pilot for Japan at the age of 26, which I believe happened in the year 2018. Moving over to the Cortax side of things, we of course have Makarov, but we've already talked about him, so let's move over to our next character, Warden, aka Izolda Garinina. Probably saying that wrong. Now, as far as Warden goes, she grew up in Russia with politician parents. However, at the age of 13 years old, there was an extremist attack and her parents perished in this, but their sacrifice ended up saving Izolda's life. At this time, she was taken in by her aunt, who was also a politician, however, had much more extreme views than her parents did. At this time, she was essentially vulnerable and started believing those extremist beliefs that her aunt had. Eventually, at the age of 18, ended up joining the military, where she surrounded herself with people with familiar beliefs. And eventually, these became so extreme that she believed that the only way to protect Russia was to subjugate the world to their beliefs and the Russian culture as well. And she looked for a role model to show her this and to follow. And the person that she found was Vladimir Makarov, and in which she ended up joining the Kony group. Enigma, aka Pham Lan Min, is Canadian, and at one point, him and his parents ended up moving to Quebec in Canada. Now, at this point, they were a part of an armed robbery, which ended up turning into a hostage situation. Now, growing up, he was all about puzzles, loved Rubik's Cubes, solving puzzles in any way that he possibly could. However, when he was in this situation in the armed robbery, he simply couldn't see a way out of it. But eventually, a group by the name of Groupe Tactique d'Intervention came in and ended up saving the day. They broke in using non-lethal force and ended up stopping the armed robbers and saved all of the hostages. After seeing this, he was enthralled by how they could do this, how they could think of a situation, and ended up joining the GTI when at the age of 20. To this day, he has worked with the GTI, diffusing hostage situations and working in their counterterrorism unit. Raptor, or Natalia Orlov, was Russian. Now, she grew up with her father out in the Russian wilderness, and often her father would leave her to go out hunting. One day, she ended up finding an old hunting rifle in a lodge nearby, and she, after time, started working on her shooting skills. But time after time, her father would go out hunting, leaving her behind, and she wanted to go. But dismissed time after time, her father went out one day and she heard on the news about a Siberian bear that was causing havoc in the town. So she went out alone into the wilderness, found that bear, took him down, and took the head and threw it at her father's feet. This time, she realized she had nothing else to prove to these men, so she ended up venturing out on her own, doing her own hunts, but nothing ever matched the thrill of taking out that bear. That was until one day when she was in Moscow, where she got the offer to go and work for the Russian military, specifically for Alpha Group, and eventually getting sent out to Chechnya. Originally, what brought her there was the paycheck. Eventually, she found the thrill of the hunt was all she needed, and she didn't need bigger and bigger game or bigger and bigger bears. She wanted smarter enemies. Specifically, she wanted to hunt soldiers. Alpine, aka Geetha Strom. She is from Norway and she grew up playing all kinds of sports, but she specialized in skiing and gymnastics. Now, when she joined high school, she had goals of eventually medaling in the Olympics. However, she ended up getting in an accident and broke her leg and was unable to try out for the team. It was a long and grueling process to heal, but by the time she did, she was signed up for mandatory military service and ended up actually really enjoying it. Eventually, she did so well that she was recommended to the Jägertruppen, which is a group of female-only soldiers. She continued to fight alongside the Jägertruppen, and even though people say that she could go and medal in the Olympics and is that good of a skier, she enjoys what she does, so to this day, that is where she works. Bantam, aka Clyde Hogan, aka, as I like to call him, Evil Scottish Captain Price. As far as this character goes, he grew up in Scotland with his mother, and as far as his childhood went, he had a very short temper and got in a lot of fights. But one thing that he loved was watching spy movies on Friday nights with his mother. It's something he wouldn't miss for the world. Now, eventually, his mother became sick and he needed to provide for her. So he dropped out of high school at the age of 16 and joined the British Army. Now, it was around this time that MI6 started having some interest in Clyde. And eventually, he worked out his childhood dream and became a spy. Now, he worked for MI6 for a while, however, was eventually discharged after he punched a diplomat in the face for bad-mouthing his mother. Now, it was at this time that he was picked up by the private service and became an interrogator, where his short temper wasn't a bad thing, but he could use it to, well, interrogate people. And that is what he does to this day. Up next, we have Corso, aka Ricardo Vargas, and he is Costa Rican. Now, he grew up in a small fishing village alongside his mother and father. Now, at some point, a drug cartel moved into his small fishing town and forced his father, who happened to be someone who fixed up boats, fishing vessels, things along those lines, but they forced him to work for the cartel, specifically repairing the drug cartel submarines. Now, they worked his father to the bone and threatened that if he wouldn't, they would burn the town to the ground, so he didn't really have an option. But eventually, an SIU unit ended up coming in and shutting down the drug cartel. At this point, he joined something called the Unidad Especial de Intervención, and as far as what he does is he rids Costa Rica, South America, from these drug cartel and leaders who go in and try to put an end to families like they did with his father. And that is where he gets his passion from. Aret Doc Dahan. She is Israeli and she grew up in a very religious family in which she had an arranged marriage. However, things went bad at the age of 20 when her husband died in a car crash. When this happened, she began to question everything, her culture, her religion, and eventually she ended up joining the Israeli army. And when she did so, she ended up finding her passion in medicine, hence the name Doc. She ended up serving as an army medic, dodging bullets and the hailstorm fire of battle and bringing her fellow soldiers to safety. Finally, we probably have the most boring character. We have Swagger. His backstory is relatively boring. He was born in Poland. Eventually, his family moved to France. He did not fit in France, so he moved back to Poland, where he joined the Polish Grom. He is one of the best soldiers for the Grom. That is pretty much it. He's cocky, he knows that he's one of the best soldiers, and that is his story. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is every operator's story in Modern Warfare 3. Some of them have big ties into zombies, to Operation Deadbolt, to the overall Modern Warfare story, and others have sad backgrounds with dead parents, and others are just cocky Polish soldiers. I don't really know how his fits in, but anyway, so those are all the operator stories. Let me know down in the comments which operator is your personal favorite. If you enjoyed the video, it took a while to put this one together, so it's always appreciated if you hit that like button, subscribe, turn notifications on. We have plenty more Call of Duty videos, zombies videos, story videos, multiplayer videos, and soon Warzone videos coming. So I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.
We are reaching for the stars.